Low. Oof. Oh, hello guys. I'm Kevin G Koopa. Today, I'm going to tell you about sports.
Sports are played all over the world, whether as hobbies, careers or as a part of fitness regimens. Various games have grown in popularity to amass a huge following across the world. The rules and characteristics of these games are dynamic and are governed by international bodies. Most of these sports are included in the Olympic Games, where different countries from all around the world compete against each other. The sports are also lucrative industries, generating billions of dollars in revenues, especially in developed countries. Sports in the United States are an important part of American culture. American football is the most popular sport to watch in the United States, followed by baseball, basketball, hockey, and soccer. Tennis, golf, wrestling, auto racing, arena football, field lacrosse, box lacrosse, and volleyball are also popular sports in the country. Soccer is also known as football. For a European, football is also known as soccer. Games involving the kicking of a ball have been played in several countries throughout history. Soccer was played in China in the 2nd and 3rd century BC. Romans played it, and different forms of soccer were played in medieval Europe. Today, soccer is one of the most popular sport in the world, played by roughly 250 million people in over 200 countries. Here's a history of soccer. In the ancient times, historians have pointed out that games resembling soccer were played in China, Egypt, Japan, and Greece in this period. There were no rules and the players aimed at kicking a ball made of animal skin into a net amidst a lot of pushing and elbowing. In 1620, American folklore asserts that Pilgrim Fathers, upon settling at Plymouth Rock, found American Indians along the Massachusetts coast playing a form of soccer. The Indians called it Pissaquicahawag, which means they gathered to play football. In 1820, many American colleges played soccer, but there was no intercollegiate competition. Rules were casual and changed often. These games were played so that the players, most of whom were soldiers, were physically fit in the eventuality of a war. Although these games more or less resembled soccer, the foundation for modern-day soccer was achieved when the Cambridge rules were drawn up in Cambridge University in 1848. In 1857, the Sheffield Football Club was formed. In 1862, John Charles Thring of Uppingham School devised some rules for soccer. In 1863, the Football Association was formed. In 1867, Sheffield FA was formed. In 1871, the Rugby Football Union was formed. In 1872, the first official international football match took place between Scotland and England in Glasgow. In 1886, the International Football Association Board was formed. In 1888, William McGregor founded the world's first football league in England. In 1904, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, the international football body, was formed in Paris. In 1913, the growing popularity of the international game led to the admittance of FIFA representatives to the International Football Association Board. In 1930, the first World Cup took place in Uruguay. Uruguay wins it. In 1931, the professional soccer era started in Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. In 1934, the second World Cup took place in Italy. The host team won it. In 1938, the third World Cup took place in France. Italy won its second World Cup. In the 1940s, the World War interrupted the World Cup. The American countries played in local cups, but the Zenit Club opened its stadium. In 1943, professional soccer started in Mexico. In 1948, amateur soccer ended. In 1950, the fourth World Cup took place in Brazil. Uruguay won it for the second time. In 1954, the fifth World Cup took place in Switzerland. It was the first one with a sponsor. Germany wins it. In 1958, the sixth World Cup took place in Sweden. Brazil wins it with players such as Pelé and Garrincha. In 1959, the South American Confederation of Soccer approved a new Interclub Cup. In 1960, the Libertadores Cup was inaugurated. Real Madrid won against the Uruguayan team Penarol in the Intercontinental Club. In 1962, the seventh World Club took place in Chile. Fans watched Brazil win on TV for the first time. In 1966, the eighth World Cup took place in England. The host team won it. The Mexican goalkeeper Antonio Carabajal set a record for most participation in World Cups. In 1970, the ninth World Cup took place in Mexico. Brazil won it, and became the country with most championships won. In 1974, the 10th World Cup took place in Germany. The fans watched the host team win on color TV. In 1975, Independiente Avellaneda won the Libertadores Cup for the fourth time. In 1978, the 11th World Cup took place in Argentina. Holland was the favorite to win. but the host team won it. In 1979, Paraguay won a Copa America. Olympia won the Intercontinental and Libertadores Cups. In 1982, the 12th World Cup took place in Spain. Italy won it. Countries from all continents played it. Maximum goals were scored. In 1984, the new star Diego Maradona is transferred to the Italian team of Naples. In 1986, the 13th World Cup took place in Mexico. Argentina wins its second World Cup. Maradona scored the most amazing goal in the history of soccer. In 1990, the 14th World Cup took place in Italy. Germany won it. In 1994, the 15th World Cup took place in USA. Brazil won it. In 1998, the 16th World Cup took place in France. The host team won it. In 1999, Mexico won the Confederations Cup. In 2002, the 17th World Cup took place in Japan and Korea. Brazil won it. In 2005, Brazil won the Confederations Cup. In 2006, the 18th World Cup took place in Germany. Italy won it. In 2007, David Beckham, one of the more popular stars in the world, made his debut in an American club, playing for the Los Angeles Galaxy. In 2008, Spain beat Germany in the Euro Cup finals. In 2010, the 19th World Cup was hosted for the first time on the African soil as the host South Africa played Mexico in the first match. It was Spain who lifted the coveted trophy, defeating Holland in the finals. In 2011, Japan's female soccer team defeated United States in the final of World Cup in Frankfurt. In 2013, the 20th World Cup took place in Brazil. Germany won it. In 2018, the 21st World Cup took place in Russia. France won it. In 2022, the 22nd World Cup will take place in Qatar. In 2026, the 23rd World Cup will take place in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. In 2030, the 24th World Cup will mark the 100th anniversary of the World Cup. In 2034, the 25th World Cup will take place. In 2038, the 26th World Cup will take place. In 2042, the 27th World Cup will take place. In 2046, the 28th World Cup will take place. In 2050, the 29th World Cup will take place. The future of soccer will keep increasing popularity even more. Golf has an estimated global following of 450 million people, and its primary influences in Western Europe, East Asia, and North America. Golf is played by use of different clubs to hit a ball over a determined course, using the fewest possible amount of strokes. The modern sport was first played in Scotland, from where it spread to the UK, and to the rest of the world. Here's a history of golf. In 100 BC, early forms of golf trace back to the Roman game of paganica, in which participants used a bent stick to hit a stuffed leather ball. In 1457, the Scottish Parliament passed several acts banning the practice of the game, along with football. In 1552, Archbishop Hamilton's charter recognizes the right of the people of St. Andrews to play golf on the Old Course. In 1567, Mary Queen of Scots reportedly plays golf just days after the murder of their husband Lord Darnley. In 1603, King James VI ascends to the English throne and his court begins playing golf at Blackheath in London. In 1724, the first known reference to golf balls was stuffed with feathers. They were previously made from hard leather. In 1729, the first known reference is made to golf in the USA, with clubs being recorded in the estate of William Burnet, the governor of Massachusetts. In 1744, the first rules of golf are set out by the Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers. In 1754, the Society of St. Andrews Golfers is formed. In 1848, the gutta-percha ball is introduced. It was a solid ball, made by softening strips of gutta-percha, dried sap of a sapodilla tree, and boiling water, and then molding the ball by hand, before placing it in cold water to harden. In 1860, the first Open Championship is played at Prestwick, and is won by Willie Park Sr. of Scotland. In 1888, St. Andrews Golf Club in Yonkers, founded by Reed. In the 1890s, persimmon becomes a popular wood for making club heads. In 1893, the Ladies' Golf Union is formed in the UK, and the British Ladies Amateur Golf Championship is played for the first time at Royal Lytham and St. Anne's. It is won by Lady Margaret Scott of England. In 1894, the United States Golf Association is formed in New York. One of its most important functions was to serve as an arbiter for questions of amateur status. The 5 charter members of the newly formed DSGA were the St. Andrews Golf Club of Yonkers, New York, Newport, RI, Golf Club, Shinnecock Hills Golf Club in Southampton, New York, the Country Club in Brookline, Mass., and Chicago Golf Club in Wheaton, Hull. In 1895, the U.S. Amateur Championship and the U.S. Open are played for the first time at Newport Country Club, Rhode Island, and are won respectively by Charles B. McDonald and Horace Rawlins. In 1900, golf is played at the Paris Olympic Games. In 1901, the first Professional Golfers Association is formed in the UK. In 1904, golf is played for the second time in the Olympic Games in St. Louis. Only men's competitions were staged. A team event of 36-hole stroke play won by the United States of America's team, and an individual event was won by George Lyon from Canada. In 1916, the PGA of America is formed, and the U.S. PGA Championship is played for the first time at Illinois Country Club in New York. In 1921, the Ryder Cup is played for the first time between the men's professionals of Great Britain and the USA at Glen Eagles. In 1922, the Walker Cup is played for the first time between the men's amateurs of Great Britain and Ireland and the USA at the National Golf Links of America in Southampton, New York. It is won by the USA. In 1929, steel-shafted clubs are accepted by the ARINDA. In 1930, Bobby Jones completed the Grand Slam of the Open, the Amateur Championship, the U.S. Open, and the U.S. Amateur Championship in one season. In 1932, the Curtis Cup is played for the first time between the women's amateurs of Great Britain and Ireland and the USA at Wentworth. It is won by the USA. In 1934, the inaugural Masters is staged at Augusta National. It is won by Horton Smith of the USA. In 1946, the U.S. Women's Open is played for the first time at Spokane Country Club in Washington, and is won by Patty Berg of the USA. In 1950, the Ladies Professional Golfers Association, LPGA, is formed in the USA. In 1953, the Tam O'Shanter World Championship of Golf becomes the first nationally televised golf tournament in the USA. In 1955, the LPGA Championship is played for the first time at Orchard Ridge Country Club. In 1976, the Women's British Open is played for the first time at Fulford Golf Club. It is won by England's Jenny Lee Smith. In the 1980s, metalwoods made of stainless steel are introduced. In 1994, the Evian Masters is played for the first time at Evian-les-Bains in France. It is won by Helen Alfredsson of Sweden. In the 2000s, materials such as graphite, titanium, carbon fiber and tungsten are used to manufacture golf clubs. In 2003, the World Amateur Golf Council becomes the International Golf Federation. In 2009, the International Olympic Committee votes in favor of golf returning to the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. In 2010, the 150th Anniversary Open Championship takes place on the Old Course at St. Andrews. In 2016, golf was played at the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro for the first time. Rugby has its primary sphere of influence in the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, and an estimated global following of 475 million people. Here's a history of rugby. Different forms of football have existed for centuries. In Britain, football games may have been played as early as the time of Roman occupation in the 1st century BC. During the 14th and 15th centuries, Shrove Tuesday football matches became annual traditions in local communities, and many of these games continued well into the 19th century. These localized versions of folk football gradually found favor within the English public, independent, schools, where they were modified and adapted into one of two forms, a dribbling game, played primarily with the feet, that was promoted at Tetton and Harrow, and a handling game favored by Rugby, Marlborough, and Cheltenham. Once they had left school, many young men wanted to continue playing the game of their youth, and the early annual matches between alumni and current senior students were not enough to satisfy these players. Football clubs were formed in the mid-19th century, with one of the very first rugby clubs appearing at Blackheath in 1858. Rugby enthusiasm also spread rapidly to Ireland and Scotland, with the club founded at the University of Dublin in 1854 and the formation by the Old Boys of Edinburgh of the Edinburgh Academicals Rugby Football Club in 1858. In 1863, the tradition of club matches began in England with Blackheath playing Richmond. Representatives of several leading football clubs met in 1863 to try to devise a common set of rules for football. Disputes arose over handling the ball and hacking, the term given to the tactics of tripping an opponent, and kicking his shins. Both handling and hacking were allowed under rugby's rules, but disallowed in other forms of football. Led by F.W. Campbell of Blackheath, the rugby men refused to budge over hacking, calling those against the practice unmanly. In 1876, representatives of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia universities formed the Intercollegiate Football Association. Though Campbell's group was in the minority, it refused to agree to the rules established for the new football association, even though many elements of rugby rules were included in early compromises. Ultimately, rugby was left outside the FA. Despite the initial reluctance to abandon hacking, rugby clubs began to abolish the practice during the late 1860s. A form of rugby football was played in South Africa in 1862. Blackheath banned it in 1865, and Richmond supported a similar prohibition in 1866. Rugby received bad publicity after a Richmond player was killed in a practice match in 1871, prompting leading clubs to respond to Richmond and Blackheath's call for an organizational meeting. Thus, in 1871 members of leading rugby clubs met to form the Rugby Football Union, which became the governing body for the sport. The game of cricket was first played in Cape Town in 1875. By this time, hacking had largely disappeared from club rugby, though it remained a part of the game's character-building qualities at rugby school. The Western Province formed a union in 1883. The South African Rugby Football Board was established in 1889. As a result of its continued adherence to the practice, rugby school did not join the RFU until 1890. Matters came to a head at an 1893 general meeting of the RFU, where the legalization of broken time payments was soundly defeated by Southern clubs, which controlled a majority of the votes. On August 29, 1895, in the town of Huddersfield in Yorkshire, 22 of the leading clubs in the north of England resigned from the RFU, and created the Northern Rugby Football Union. The Metropolitan Rugby Union, later the New South Wales Rugby Union, was founded in 1897 to administer league competitions in Sydney, and devised a district system that led to increased spectator interest. It is becoming the Rugby Football League in 1922. The Italian Rugby Federation was founded in 1928. The first Rugby World Cup competition organized by the IRB was held in 1987 in New Zealand and Australia, and was a popular and financial success. Rugby Union thus embarked upon a road toward professionalism and new levels of commercialism, that eventually led to the full professionalization of the sport in 1995. Today, Rugby Union is both a professional and amateur game, and is dominated by the first-tier unions, New Zealand, Ireland, Wales, England, South Africa, Australia, Argentina, Scotland, Italy, and France. Second and third-tier unions include Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Fiji, Georgia, Germany, Hong Kong, Japan, Kenya, Namibia, the Netherlands, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Samoa, Spain, Tonga, the United States, and Uruguay. Rugby Union is administered by World Rugby, whose headquarters are located in Dublin, Ireland. It is the national sport in New Zealand, Wales, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Georgia, and Madagascar, and is the most popular form of rugby globally. Here's a history of baseball. Baseball has an estimated 500 million global followers and enjoys its highest levels of popularity in the United States, the Caribbean, and Japan. The sport is a bat-and-ball sport involving two teams of 9 players each, who participate in batting and fielding to earn points. Different versions of the sport were played in the U.S., before it gained nationwide popularity in the 19th century. In 1839, Abner Doubleday created the game of baseball in his own backyard. In 1845, Alexander Cartwright made the rules of baseball. In 1846, the first official game was played between a team called the Knickerbockers and a team of cricket players. In 1866, a women's ball team was formed by students at Vassar College. In 1867, the first recorded curveball was thrown by Candy Cummings. In 1869, another pro team was formed, this time in Boston. They were called the Boston Red Stockings. On February 2, 1876, the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs was founded, replacing the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, which had been founded in 1871 as a replacement itself for the National Association of Baseball Players. Note no mention of professional, which operated from 1869 to 1871. On May 1, 1884, catcher Moses Fleetwood Walker signed up to play for the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association, a professional baseball league considered a major league in existence from 1882 to 1891, and was a rival to the National League. The American League was founded in 1901 as a rival major league of professional baseball, and the rivalry was formalized in the advent of the World Series in 1903. On June 23, 1917, Boston Red Sox pitcher Babe Ruth pitched to only one batter, walking him before he was ejected from the game for punching the umpire. Pitcher Ernie Shore was brought in to complete the game against the Senators. The base runner was thrown out trying to steal second base, and Shore retired the next 26 batters, completing a no-hitter between himself and Ruth, probably the most bizarre no-hitter in baseball history. On October 3, 1919, Adolfo Luque, born in Cuba in 1890, became the first Latin American Major League Baseball player to play in a World Series. On December 26, 1919, the owner of the Boston Red Sox gave the owner of the New York Yankees probably the greatest Christmas gift in history when he sold Babe Ruth, the greatest baseball player of all time. Red Sox owner Harry Frazee was said to have needed money to finance a play and got only $100,000 in money for the rights to Ruth and a $350,000 loan. On February 13, 1920, the Negro National League of Professional Baseball was founded, not the first all-African American baseball league, but the first to last more than one season and the foundation for African American professional baseball in the United States. On August 3, 1921, the Commissioner of Baseball, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, reaffirmed the ban from baseball on the 8 players involved in the Black Sox scandal, even though they had just been acquitted in criminal court. Accused of throwing the 1919 World Series, the group included the immortal shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the game's most popular players. The world of sports has been beset by scandals over the years, more or less non-stop in the 20th and 21st centuries. On October 7, 1925, baseball great and Hall of Fame pitcher Christy Mathewson died of tuberculosis brought on by a weakening of his respiratory system due to accidental exposure to poison gas during World War I. On August 11, 1929, George Herman Babe Ruth hit his 500th home run at Cleveland's League Park, the first Major League Baseball player to achieve that lofty status. On June 3, 1932, New York Yankee greats Lou, Henry Lewis, Gehrig and Tony Lazzeri made history with their batting prowess. Gehrig became the first Major League Baseball player in the modern era, after 1900, to hit 4 home runs in one game, while Lazzeri became the first and only major leaguer to hit for the natural cycle, and finish it off with a grand slam. On January 29, 1936, the first class of Baseball Hall of Famers was named, and was comprised of Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. On August 20, 1938, Yankees first baseman and Iron Horse Lou Gehrig hit his 23rd Grand Slam of his career, a monumental Major League Baseball record that stood for 75 years until topped by Alex Rodriguez. On April 1, 1939, Phil Niekro, Hall of Fame pitcher and winner of 318 Major League games, was born. On June 12, 1939, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum opened in Cooperstown, New York. On May 22, 1942, Ted Williams, arguably the best baseball player of that time, joined the U.S. Marine Corps as a naval aviator. He flew the F-4U Corsair in combat with the Japanese. On October 6, 1945, Billy Sionis and his pet Billy Goat were ejected from Chicago's Wrigley Field during Game 4 of the 1945 World Series, thereby, allegedly, cursing the Chicago Cubs for at least the next 60 years. On February 20, 1952, Los Angeles native Emmett Ashford became the first African-American umpire to work in integrated, mainly white, professional baseball when he left his post office job to work for the International Southwestern League. On April 9, 1965, the Houston Astrodome hosted an exhibition baseball game between the New York Yankees and the Houston Astros, the first indoor baseball game. On February 9, 1971, baseball pitcher Leroy Satchel Paige was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, the first player from the Negro Leagues so honored. On January 11, 1973, the American League of Major League Baseball voted to accept a rule change allowing the position of designated hitter, so that the pitcher would not have to bat, increasing the offense and supposedly the excitement of the game. The opponents of the DH claimed that, by taking the strategy of whether or not to pull a pitcher for a pinch hitter out of the game would basically ruin baseball. On June 4, 1974, baseball history, not the good kind, was made in Cleveland. Recently we ran articles about great baseball performances. This incident is not one of them. On April 8, 1975, slugger Frank Robinson became the first African-American Major League Baseball manager when he managed the Cleveland Indians opening day game. On September 26, 1981, Nolan Ryan, a right-handed pitcher for the Houston Astros, pitched the record-breaking 5th no-hitter of his career. Ryan, arguably the best pitcher in Major League Baseball history, went on to throw 2 more no-hitters in his career, the last, number 7, coming in 1991, when he was an astounding 44 years old. On July 24, 1983, Major League Baseball experienced a strange incident that caused a furor on the field, in corporate offices, and in the homes of baseball fans all over the country when George Brett of the Kansas City Royals blasted a home run, and then had it taken away. On May 1, 1991, 2 of Major League Baseball's greatest players set records that had baseball fans buzzing. Rickey Henderson stole his record-breaking 939th base and Nolan Ryan pitched his 7th no-hitter. Certain baseball records have an awe-inspiring quality to them, even if they are later broken. On August 12, 1994, Major League Baseball players went on strike, ending the 1994 Major League Baseball season, and causing the cancellation of the 1994 World Series. On October 5, 2001, Barry Bonds hit 2 home runs to break Mark McGwire's record of 70 in one season, when Bonds hit number 71 and 72. Bonds would later be implicated in a far-reaching steroids scandal in baseball, a scandal that would also include McGwire. On October 28, 2004, Seattle Mariners star Ichiro Suzuki broke an 84-year-old treasured Major League Baseball record, held by George Sisler, by stroking 262 hits in one season. Suzuki, known better by just his first name, had come to the U.S. to play Major League Baseball here, after starring in Japan. On August 22, 2007, the Texas Rangers creamed the Baltimore Orioles 32-3, the most runs ever scored by a Major League Baseball team in the modern era. Sometimes it goes like that. One side is all the might or all the luck, and really gives it to the other side. This disparity can happen in sports, in wars, or in any competitive endeavor. On April 29, 2015, the Baltimore Orioles hosted the Chicago White Sox for one of the most bizarre Major League Baseball games of all time, one at Camden Yards in which no fans were permitted to attend. Basketball boasts of having an estimated 825 million followers worldwide, and a global sphere of influence, and was very popular in the United States. Here's a history of basketball, my favorite sport. The history of basketball began with its invention on December 1891 in Springfield, Massachusetts by Canadian physical education instructor James Naismith as a less injury-prone sport than football. On December 21, 1891, James Naismith published rules for a new game using 5 basic ideas and 13 rules. The first public basketball game was played in Springfield, Massachusetts, on March 11, 1892. The 18 players were John G. Thompson, Eugene S. Libby, Edwin Page Ruggles, William Marchese, T. Duncan Patton, Frank Mahon, Finlay G. McDonald, William H. Davis and Lyman Archibald, who defeated George Weller, Wilbert Carey, Ernest Hildner, Raymond Kane, Genzaburo Ishikawa, Benjamin S. Branch, Franklin Barnes, George Day and Henry Jellin. In 1893, Melrody had arranged the first European match in Paris, in Montmartre. At the same time, Bob Gailey went to Tientsin, China, Duncan Patton to India, Genzaburo Ishikawa to Japan and C. Harrick to Persia. The same year that iron hoops and a hammock-style basket were introduced. The first known U.S. college to field a basketball team against an outside opponent was Vanderbilt University, which played against the local YMCA in Nashville, Tennessee, on February 7, 1893. The second recorded instance of an organized college basketball game was Geneva College's game against the New Brighton YMCA on April 8, 1893, in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. The first recorded game between two college teams occurred on February 9, 1895, when Hamline University faced Minnesota A&M. The first intercollegiate match using the modern rule of 5 players per side is often credited as a game between the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa, in Iowa City, Iowa, on January 18, 1896. By 1897, the U.S. Amateur Athletic Union had taken over oversight of basketball activity from the YMCA. The first professional basketball league was formed in 1898. Players earned $2.50 for home games, $1.25 for games on the road. By 1900, the game of basketball had spread to colleges across the country. All black basketball teams, Black Fives, were established in 1904. On April 1905, representatives of 15 colleges separately took over control of the college game, creating the Collegiate Basketball Rule Committee. In 1906, metal hoops, nets, and backboards introduced. Moreover, earlier the soccer ball was replaced by a Spalding ball, similar to the one used today. In 1907, the amateur, all-black Olympian Athletic League was formed in New York City consisting of the Smart Set Athletic Club, Street, Christopher Club, Marathon Athletic Club, Alpha Physical Culture Club, and the Jersey City Colored YMCA. In 1908, Smart Set Athletic Club of Brooklyn, a member of the Olympian Athletic League, was named the first colored basketball world's champion. In 1909, the first international match was held in St. Petersburg. Mayak St. Petersburg beat a YMCA American team. In 1910, Howard University's first varsity basketball team began. During World War I, the American Expeditionary Force took basketball wherever it went. The first great European event was held in 1919 in Joinville-le-Pont, near Paris, during the Inter-Allied Games. The United States, led by future Hall of Fame player Max Friedman, won against Italy and France, and in Italy beat France. In 1922, the Commonwealth Five, the first all-black professional team, was founded. The New York Renaissance was founded in 1923. On June 18, 1932, Argentina, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Portugal, Romania, and Switzerland founded the International Basketball Federation. The Basketball League was founded in New York City on June 6, 1946, as the Basketball Association of America. The American Basketball Association was founded as an alternative to the NBA in 1967 at a time when the NBA was experiencing a lot of popularity. Table tennis enjoys a global sphere of influence and has an estimated 875 million followers worldwide. Here's a history of table tennis. The game was invented in England in the early days of the 20th century and was originally called ping pong, a trading name. The name table tennis was adopted in 1921, when the old Ping Pong Association formed in 1902 was revived. The original association had broken up about 1905, though apparently the game continued to be played in parts of England outside London, and by the 1920s was being played in many countries. Led by representatives of Germany, Hungary, and England, the Fédération Internationale de Tennis de Table, International Table Tennis Federation, was founded in 1926, the founding members being England, Sweden, Hungary, India, Denmark, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Wales. The first World Championships were held in London in 1926, and from then until 1939 the game was dominated by players from Central Europe, the men's team event being won 9 times by Hungary, and twice by Czechoslovakia. In the mid-1950s Asia emerged as a breeding ground of champions, and from that time the men's team event has been won by either Japan or China, as has the women's event, though to a lesser extent, North Korea also became an international force. In 1980 the first World Cup was held, and G Koopa of China won the $12,500 first prize. Table tennis became an Olympic sport in 1988, with singles and doubles competition for men and women. By the mid-1990s more than 165 national associations were members. The primary influence of volleyball is seen in Western Europe and North America, and the sport has an estimated global following of 900 million fans. The game of volleyball, originally called mintonette, was invented in 1895 by William G. Morgan after the invention of basketball only 4 years before. Morgan, a graduate of the Springfield College of the YMCA, designed the game to be a combination of basketball, baseball, tennis, and handball. Here's a history of volleyball. In 1900, a special ball was designed for the sport. In 1916, in the Philippines, an offensive style of passing the ball in high trajectory, to be struck by another player, the set and spike, were introduced. In 1917, the game was changed from 21 to 15 points. In 1920, 3 hits per side and back row attack rules were instituted. In 1922, the first YMCA National Championships were held in Brooklyn, New York. 27 teams from 11 states were represented. In 1928, it became clear that tournaments and rules were needed, so the United States Volleyball Association was formed. The first U.S. Open was staged, as the field was open to non-YMCA squads. In 1930, the first two-man beach game was played. In 1934, national volleyball referees were approved and recognized. In 1937, at the AAU convention in Boston, the action was taken to recognize the U.S. Volleyball Association as the official national governing body in the U.S. In 1947, the Fédération Internationale de Volleyball was founded. In 1948, the first two-man beach tournament was held. In 1949, the initial World Championships were held in Prague, Czechoslovakia. In 1964, volleyball was introduced to the Olympic Games in Tokyo. In 1965, the California Beach Volleyball Association was formed. In 1974, the World Championships in Mexico were telecast in Japan. In 1975, the U.S. national women's team began a year-round training regime in Pasadena, Texas. In 1977, the U.S. national men's team began a year-round training regime in Dayton, Ohio, moved to San Diego, California, in 1981. In 1979, the U.S. national women's team moves to Colorado Springs, Colorado. In 1980, the U.S. national women's team moves to Cabo de Casa and Fountain Valley, California. In 1981, the U.S. national men's team moves to San Diego, California. In 1983, the Association of Volleyball Professionals was formed. In 1984, the U.S. won their first medals at the Olympics in Los Angeles. The men won the gold, and the women the silver. In 1985, the U.S. national women's team moves to San Diego, California. In 1986, the Women's Professional Volleyball Association was formed. In 1988, the U.S. men repeated the gold in the Olympics in Korea. In 1990, the World League was created. In 1995, the sport of volleyball was 100 years old. In 1996, two-person beach volleyball became an Olympic sport. Tennis has an estimated global following of 1 billion fans and a global sphere of influence. Different versions of the sport are believed to have been played by the Egyptians, Romans and the Greeks, although the modern sport was first popularized in France. Here's a history of tennis. Some people believe that the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans played different versions of tennis. Drawings and descriptions of any tennis-like games have not been discovered, but a few Arabic words dating from ancient Egyptian times are cited as evidence. The theory goes that the name tennis is derived from the Egyptian town of Tunis alongside the Nile, and the word racket evolved from the Arabic word for the palm of the hand, rahat. Aside from these two words, evidence for any form of tennis preceding the year 1000 is lacking, and most historians credit the first origins of the game to 11th or 12th century French monks, who began playing a crude handball against their monastery walls, or over a rope, strung across a courtyard. The game took on the name jeu de paume, which means game of the hand. Many who dispute more ancient origins argue that tennis is derived from the French word tenez, which meant something to the effect of take this, set as one player would serve to the other. As the game became more popular, courtyard playing areas began to be modified into indoor courts, where the ball was still played off the walls. After bare hands were found too uncomfortable, players began using a glove, then either a glove with webbing between the fingers or a solid paddle, followed by webbing attached to a handle, essentially a racket. Rubber balls were still centuries away, so the ball was a wad of hair, wool, or cork wrapped in string and cloth or leather, then in later years, hand-stitched and filling to look something like a modern baseball. The nobility learned the game from the monks, and some accounts report as many as 1,800 courts in France by the 13th century. The game became such a popular diversion, both the Pope and Louis IV tried unsuccessfully to ban it. It soon spread to England, where both Henry VII and Henry VIII were avid players who promoted the building of more courts. By the year 1500, a wooden frame racket strung with sheep gut was in common use, as was a cork-cord ball weighing around 3 ounces. The early tennis courts were quite different from the modern lawn tennis court most of us are used to. The early game matured into what is now called real tennis, and England's Hampton Court, built in 1625, is still used today. Only a handful of such courts remain. It's a narrow, indoor court where the ball is played off walls that include a number of openings and oddly angled surfaces toward which the players aim for various strategic purposes. The net is 5 feet high on the ends, but 3 feet in the middle, creating a pronounced droop. The game's popularity dwindled almost to nothing during the 1700s, but in 1850, Charles Goodyear invented a vulcanization process for rubber, and during the 1850s, players began to experiment with using the bouncier rubber balls outdoors on grass courts. An outdoor game was, of course, completely different from an indoor game played off walls, so several new sets of rules were formulated. In 1874, Major Walter C. Wingfield patented in London the equipment and rules for a game very similar to modern tennis. In the same year, the first tennis courts appeared in the United States. By the following year, equipment sets had been sold for use in Russia, India, Canada, and China. Croquet was highly popular at this time, and the smooth croquet courts proved readily adaptable for tennis. Wingfield's original court had the shape of an hourglass, narrowest at the net, and it was shorter than the modern court. His rules were subjected to considerable criticism, and he revised them in 1875, but he soon left the further development of the game to others. In 1877, the All England Club held the first Wimbledon tournament, and its tournament committee came up with a rectangular court and a set of rules that are essentially the game we know today. The net was still 5 feet high at the sides, a carryover from the game's indoor ancestor, and the service boxes were 26 feet deep, but by 1882, the specifications had evolved to their current form. Field hockey has an estimated global following of 2 billion fans, and sees its primary sphere of influence in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Here's a history of field hockey. The earliest origins of the game date back to the Middle Ages in Pakistan. The game can't be played on grass, water turf, artificial turf or synthetic field, as well as an indoor board surface. Each team plays with 11 players, including the goalie. Players use sticks made out of wood, carbon fiber, fiberglass, or a combination of carbon fiber and fiberglass in different quantities, with the higher carbon fiber stick being more expensive and less likely to break. To hit a round, hard, plastic ball, the length of the stick depends on the player's individual height. Only one face of the stick is allowed to be used. Goalies often have a different kind of stick. However, they can also use an ordinary field hockey stick. The specific goalkeeping sticks have another curve at the end of the stick. This is to give them more surface area to save the ball. The uniform consists of shin guards, shoes, shorts, a mouth guard, and a jersey. Today, the game is played globally, mainly in parts of Western Europe, South Asia, Southern Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and parts of the United States. Known simply as hockey in many territories, the term field hockey is used primarily in Canada and the United States, where ice hockey is more popular. In Sweden, the term land hockey is used, and to some degree also in Norway, where it is governed by Norway's Bandy Association. Cricket has a 2.5 billion person estimated global following, and its primary sphere of influence is in the United Kingdom and Commonwealth countries. Here's a history of cricket. Evidence of cricket being played in Guildford, Surrey started in 1550. The first conclusive records for a game recognizable as cricket describe a match played in Kent in 1646. The first reference to cricket being played abroad, by British residents in Aleppo, Syria in 1676. Cricket match announced on Clapham Common in 1700. Thomas Lord founded the Marylebone Cricket Club, which staged its first match between Middlesex and Essex in 1787. The first international match was played in 1844. The first match played at the Oval in 1845. The first Yorkshire v Lancashire match in 1849. Victoria and Tasmania playing the first intercolonial game in Sydney in 1851. The cricket bat was invented in 1853. The first match between a team from England and an Australian team at the MCG took place on January 1, 1862. In 1867, the first Australian cricket team to tour England, comprised of Indigenous Australian players. On March 15, 1877, the first test match began between England and Australia. On May 12, 1890, the first ever official English Cricket County Championship match began. In 1892, Australia established the domestic Sheffield Shield competition. In 1900, cricket was played at the Paris Olympic Games, won by a British team. In 1970, the first use of drop-in pitches. In 1971, the first limited overs international match took place at Melbourne Cricket Ground. In 1973, the first Women's Cricket World Cup was held in England. In 1975, the first Cricket World Cup was played in England. In 1979, the first Women's Test match was held between England and Australia at Lord's. In 1992, a third umpire was first used to adjudicate brunette appeals with television replays in the Test series between South Africa and India. In 2003, T20 cricket was originally introduced by the ECB for the professional inter-county competition in England and Wales. In 2005, the first men's 2020 international was between Australia and New Zealand. In 2007, the inaugural ICC World 2020 was played in South Africa. In 2015, the first ever day-night test match was played in Adelaide. Association football, or soccer, is the most popular sport in the world. It is estimated that more than half of the world's population consider themselves to be association football, soccer, fans. The sport enjoys an estimated 4 billion person following, and a global sphere of influence. Here's a history of football. On November 6, 1869, Rutgers and Princeton played the first college soccer football game. On November 13, 1875, Harvard and Yale played the first football game, using modified rugby rules. In 1876, Intercollegiate Football Association was formed with 4 teams: Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Princeton. In 1880, the snap is introduced, replacing the rugby scrum. In 1882, downs are introduced. In 1883, a new scoring system is introduced. In 1887, the Orange Tornadoes were founded. In 1892, William Heffelfinger paid $500 to play on the Allegheny Athletic Association's team in a game against a rival club, and he won the game for them. In 1893, the Pittsburgh Athletic Club signed one of its players, probably halfback Grant Dippert, to the first known pro football contract, which covered all of the Pacs games. In 1895, John Prowlier became the first football player to openly turn pro. In 1896, the Allegheny Athletic Association team fielded the first completely professional team. In 1897, the Latrobe Athletic Association football team went entirely professional. In 1898, the Morgan Athletic Club is formed, and the Chicago Cardinals were founded by Chris O'Brien, and the Rochester Jeffersons were also founded. In 1899, the Louisville Breckenridges and the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets were founded. In 1900, William C. Temple took over the team payments for the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club, becoming the first known individual club owner. In 1901, the Columbus Panhandles were founded by workers at the panhandle shops of the Pennsylvania Railroads. In 1902, the Toledo Maroons were founded. On November 15, 1904, the Canton Bulldogs were founded. In 1905, the Muncie Flyers and the Minneapolis Marines were founded. On October 27, 1906, the first authenticated pass completion in a pro game came on when George Parrott of Massillon threw a completion to Dan Riley in a victory over a combined Benwood-Moundsville team. In 1907, the Rock Island Independents were founded. In 1910, the number of downs is increased to 4, and the Cincinnati Sulphs were founded. In 1912, field goals changed from 5 points to 4 points, and eventually 3 points. Touchdowns were increased from 5 points to 6 points. In 1913, the Dayton Triangles and the Tonawanda Lumbermen were founded. In 1915, the Buffalo All-Americans, the Staten Island Stapletons, and the Racine Legion were founded. In 1916, the Cleveland Tigers and the Providence Steamroller were founded. In 1917, the Hammond Pros were founded. In 1919, the New York Brickley Giants were founded by Charles Brickley, who received All-American honors while at Harvard. On August 11, 1919, the Green Bay Packers were founded by George Cahoon and Curly Lambeau. In 1920, the Chicago Bears were founded by George Halas, who helped form the APFA, as the Decatur Stallies, and the Pittsville Maroons were also founded. On August 20, 1920, the National Football Leagues formed with 5 teams: the Rochester Jeffersons, the Dayton Triangles, the Columbus Panhandles, the Akron Indians and the Canton Bulldogs. On September 17, 1920, the Arizona Cardinals joined the NFL, and the Chicago Bears were founded in Decatur, Illinois. In 1921, the Washington Senators were founded. In 1922, the Milwaukee Badgers and the Orang Indians were founded. On June 24, 1922, the NFL is formed, and the Chicago Cardinals, the Green Bay Packers, and the Chicago Bears joined the NFL. In 1923, the St. Louis All-Stars were founded, but they were folded, and the Duluth Kellys were also founded. In 1924, the Kansas City Cowboys and the Hartford Blues were founded. On September 16, 1924, the Kenosha Maroons were founded, but they were folded. In 1925, the New York Giants, owned by Tim Mara, joined the NFL. On August 1, 1925, the New York Giants were founded. In 1926, Red Grange and C.C. Pyle founded the American Football League. The Los Angeles Buccaneers were founded. The Columbus Panhandles were folded. On November 12, 1926, the Horsemen withdrew from the AFL and merged with Lions. In 1927, the Akron Pros and the Canton Bulldogs were folded. In 1929, the Portsmouth Spartans were founded. On July 12, 1930, the Detroit Lions started out in the NFL, making the NFL. On July 9, 1932, the Washington Redskins, founded by George Preston Marshall, joined the NFL. On July 8, 1933, the Philadelphia Eagles are founded by 2 former members of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. The Pittsburgh Pirates are founded by Artruni as well. In 1936, a second AFL is founded, featuring 6 teams: Cleveland, New York, Pittsburgh, Rochester, Brooklyn, and Boston. In 1937, the Cleveland Rams joined the NFL. In 1938, the first Pro Bowl is played in Los Angeles. In 1943, helmets become mandatory for all players. In 1944, the Boston Yanks joined the NFL. On June 4, 1944, the Cleveland Browns were founded. On June 4, 1946, the San Francisco 49ers started out in the All-America Football Conference. In 1947, rules for sudden death overtime and playoff games are added, and the Baltimore Colts started out as the Miami Seahawks of the AAFC. In 1949, the AAFC merges with the NFL, which takes on 3 of the teams: the Cleveland Browns, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Baltimore Colts, but the Boston Yanks become the New York Bulldogs. In 1950, the New York Bulldogs become the Yanks again, and the Cleveland Browns, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Baltimore Colts joined the NFL. In 1952, the Dallas Texans are founded, but bad play and horrid attendance lead the team to fold after the season, along with the Baltimore Colts and New York Yanks. On January 23, 1953, the Indianapolis Colts were founded. On August 3, 1959, the Tennessee Titans were founded. On August 14, 1959, the Denver Broncos, the New York Jets, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Kansas City Chiefs were founded. On November 16, 1959, the New England Patriots were founded. In 1960, the Dallas Cowboys joined the NFL with Tom Landry at head coach and Tex Schramm as general manager. On January 28, 1960, the Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys were formed. On January 30, 1960, the Oakland Raiders were formed. In 1961, the Minnesota Vikings joined the NFL. On June 30, 1965, the Atlanta Falcons were founded. On August 16, 1965, the Miami Dolphins were founded. In 1966, the Miami Dolphins joined the AFL, while the Atlanta Falcons are added to the NFL. On November 1, 1966, the New Orleans Saints were founded. In 1967, the New Orleans Saints are added to the NFL. On May 23, 1967, the Cincinnati Bengals were founded. In 1968, the AFL adds a new franchise, the Cincinnati Bengals. In 1970, the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots, the Miami Dolphins, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Tennessee Titans, the Denver Broncos, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Oakland Raiders, the San Diego Chargers, and the New York Jets joined the NFL. On April 24, 1974, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were founded. On June 4, 1974, the Seattle Seahawks were founded. In 1976, the Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers joined the NFL. In 1978, the league added a second wild-card team from each conference, lost 16 playoff teams, bringing the total number of playoff teams to 10. In 1982, the NFL begins counting sacks separately from tackles. In 1984, the USFL expands to 18 teams. In 1987, instant replay is introduced in the NFL. In 1990, 2 wild-card teams were added, bringing the total to 12. On October 25, 1987, the regular players return as the NFL strike. On October 26, 1993, the Carolina Panthers were founded. In 1995, the Jacksonville Jaguars and Carolina Panthers joined the NFL. On November 30, 1993, the Jacksonville Jaguars were founded. On November 6, 1995, the Baltimore Ravens were founded. In 1996, the Baltimore Ravens joined the NFL. In 1999, the Cleveland Browns returned to the NFL. On October 6, 1999, the Houston Texans were founded. In 2002, the Houston Texans joined the NFL as an expansion team. Millions of people played these sports. Here's a history of ice skating. In 1873, James Creighton, a member of the Victoria Skating Club and a figure skating judge, started organizing sessions of shinny at the rink, played informally between members of the club and friends. On March 3, 1875, the first recorded indoor ice hockey game took place at the Victoria Skating Rink in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. In 1887, 4 clubs from Montreal formed the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada and developed a structured schedule. In 1892, the Montreal Hockey Association was formed. In 1896, the Western Pennsylvania Hockey League was formed. In 1898, the Canadian Amateur Hockey League was formed. In 1904, the International Hockey League, based around Lake Michigan, was created as the first fully professional league, which lasted for 2 seasons. In recruiting players, the IHL caused an athletic war that trained amateur clubs of top players, most noticeably in the Ontario Hockey Association. In 1906, the Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association was formed, which mixed paid and amateur players in its rosters, which led to the demise of the IHL. In 1908, the Ontario Professional Hockey League was formed. In 1909, the Canadian Hockey Association was formed. Bidding wars for players led many ECHA teams to lose money, and it eventually folded on November 25, 1909. As a result of the dissolution of the ECHA, 2 leagues were formed: the Canadian Hockey Association and the National Hockey Association. Since the NHA's owners were notable, wealthy businessmen, the CHA did not complete a season, as the NHA easily recruited the top players, and interest in the CHA teams faded. By 1914, the rival Pacific Coast Hockey Association League was launched, and the NHA champion would play off each season against the PCHA champion for the Stanley Cup, ending the challenge year in 1917. The National Hockey Association was formed. After unsuccessfully attempting to resolve disputes with Eddie Livingstone, owner of the Toronto Blue Shirts, executives of the three other NHA franchises suspended the NHA and formed the National Hockey League, replacing the Livingstone team with a temporary team in Toronto, the Arenas. The NHL's first quarter-century saw the league compete against two rival major leagues, the Pacific Coast Hockey Association and Western Canada Hockey League, 4 players in the Stanley Cup. In 1921, the Western Canada Hockey League was formed. The NHL first expanded into the United States in 1924 with the founding of the Boston Bruins, and by 1926 consisted of 10 teams in Ontario, Quebec, the Great Lakes region, and the northeastern United States. In 1942, the Great Depression and World War II reduced the league to 6 teams, later known as the Original Six. At the same time, the NHL emerged as the only major league and the sole competitor for the Stanley Cup. In 1947, the NHL completed a deal with the Stanley Cup trustees to gain full control of the cup. Willie Reed broke the NHL's black-collar barrier when he suited up for the Bruins in 1958. In 1959, Jacques Plante became the first goaltender to regularly use a mask for protection. The Original Six era ended in 1967 when the NHL doubled in size by adding 6 new expansion teams. The 6 existing teams were formed into the newly created East Division, while the expansion teams were formed into the West Division. The NHL continued to expand, adding another 6 teams, to total 18 by 1974. When the WA ceased operations in 1979, the NHL absorbed 4 of the league's teams, which brought the NHL to 21 teams. This continued expansion was partially brought about by the NHL's attempts to compete with the World Hockey Association. Eventually, Soviet bloc players streamed into the NHL with the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. Since then, the league has grown from 22 teams in 1992 to 31 as the NHL spread its footprint across the United States. In 1998, the NHL began awarding teams a single point for losing in overtime, hoping to reduce the number of tie games. Now here's a history of softball. In November 1887, George Hancock, a reporter for Chicago Board of Trade, invented softball. The first rule book is said to have been issued by Hancock in 1889. In 1895, Louis Roper Sr. moved the game outside on a vacant lot outside of the Minneapolis, Minnesota firehouse he worked at, so the firefighters could get some exercise while waiting for an alarm. It was known at that time as "Kitten League Ball," which was later shortened to "Kitten Ball." In 1922 the name "Kitten Ball" was changed to "Diamond Ball." At different times, the name of the game also would include "Mush Ball" and "Pumpkin Ball." It wasn't until 1926 that the term "softball" was used, when Walter Hackinson of the YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association, of Denver, Colorado conceived of it while attending a meeting to form the Colorado Amateur Softball Association. There have been many variations of the game over the years as well. In 1933, the first ever national amateur softball tournament took place in conjunction with Chicago's World's Fair, and soon after, the reporter who wrote about the event, Leo Fisher, helped establish the Amateur Softball Association. Softball continued to spread to the rest of the world, with perhaps its biggest push coming from American servicemen playing and teaching the game on the fields of World War II. In 1952, the first meeting was held for the International Softball Federation, which would govern the sport around the world, and the first World Championship in the international play took place in 1965 when women's teams from 5 countries competed in Australia. In 1991, women's fast-pitch softball was selected to debut as a medal sport at the 1996 Olympic Summer Games in Atlanta, Georgia. Now here's a history of swimming. In 2500 BC, first Egyptian hieroglyphics depicting swimming. In 400 BC, Egyptians and Romans leisurely dived off cliffs. In 36th BC, Japanese Emperor Sujio encouraged swimming. In 78 AD, Romans introduced swimming to Britain as a manly social event. In the 7th century, plagues unnerved swimming during the Dark Ages. In the 14th century, medieval knights to master swimming in armor. In the 15th century, Church objected to naked bathing on moral grounds. In the 16th century, Oxford and Cambridge University banned swimming after fatalities. In the 17th century, Japanese Emperor Go-Yuzei ruled that school children should swim. In the 18th century, sea swimming was popularized by George III. In 1875, Captain Webb pioneered the English Channel crossing. In 1885, the first diving competition was held in Germany. In 1892, first women's championship was held in Scotland. In 1908, the Fédération Internationale de Natation the Amateur formed. In 1986, synchronized swimming, a Commonwealth Games event. Now here's the history of paintball. The Nelson Paint Company was founded in 1940 by Charles and Devin Nelson. Nelson had patented a number of devices that foresters could use to mark timber. One of those was a squirt gun that sprayed paint. But the paintball was invented because the Nelson Paint Company was asked by the U.S. Forestry Service for a reliable way of marking trees from a distance. The problem was the tree was sometimes across a stream or thick brush. The idea behind paintballs was that they could shoot them out over the obstruction, and a ball from a gun would shoot farther than a stream of paint. Or ranchers could also use the balls to mark stray cattle. Charles Nelson played around with the idea and invented a paint pellet that can be shot out of a gun. It was actually created by squirting paint into gelatin capsules normally used then for horse bills. Nelson Paint then approached Crossman to design a pistol to shoot the paintballs. After 3 years of production with poor sales, Crossman no longer found it financially sound to produce the marker. Nelson then moved to Daisy, the Aragon manufacturer, to produce a paintball pistol. Obviously not owning the design of the Crossman 707, Nelson was not able to simply pass the design to another manufacturer. A new design needed to be created instead, which is exactly what Daisy did. James Hale, the Daisy designer, created the Splosh marker, which became known as the now famous Nell Spot 007. The paintballs were also mass-produced under contract by Nelson. R.P. Scherer produced the encapsulated oil-based paintballs for the makers. Crossman produced the first ever paintball marker, the Nelspot 707, for the Nelson Paintball Company, using an existing design of a car and a pellet gun, the Crossman 150, now similar to the Crossman 2240. Daisy Manufacturing Company patented and manufactured the second paintball marker, the Daisy Splosh marker, which Nelson marketed as the famous Nell Spot 007. This marker is important because it is the marker that was used for that first ever game of paintball. The invention of the paintball gun is sometimes mistakenly credited to James Hale because of a patent filed for compressed gas gun with trigger-operated hammer-release latching structure in 1972 by James the 100th Hale of the Victor Comptometer Corporation. The patent for Hale's paintball gun was registered June 19, 1972, with Hale's name listed as the inventor. In the spring of 1976/77, Bob Guernsey and Hayes Noel wrote up the rules for that first game. The game was initially developed in May 1981 for recreation, but now is frequently played at a formal sporting level with the organized competition that involves major tournaments, professional teams, and players. The first game of paintball was played on June 27, 1981, at Henniker, New Hampshire, United States. On October 1981, the second game of paintball, according to Bob Guernsey and NSG, this game took place in Alabama, and must have been the first game open to the general public. On March 1982, the world's first commercial paintball field was opened by Bob Guernsey in New Hampshire. Bob Guernsey invented and marketed paintball as the game we played today under the brand name of National Survival Game, or the Survival Game. On April 1982, Caleb Strong opens the first outdoor playing field in Rochester, New York. In 1983, the first NSG National Championship was held in Grantham, New Hampshire at an upcountry farm and restaurant called Graylage's. On June 1983, Lyon Latwell, one of the original 12 players, writes the official survival game manual, the first paintball publication. In 1985, the first outdoor playing field is opened in England. In 1988, the International Paintball Players Association is founded as a non-profit association dedicated to the education, growth, and safety of the sport of paintball. Top Gun Paintball Games owner, Raymond Gong, founded and legalized paintball in New Jersey on May 2, 1988. On July 1992, Team Internet is formed as players prepared for the world record game. On November 1992, National Professional Paintball League is founded in Chicago and the NPPL Pro-Am Series starts with events around the U.S. In 1995, paintball makes its cable TV debut on ESPN with the airing of the 1995 World Championship Games held in Orlando, Florida. In 1996, paintball playing fields, stores, and tournaments can now be found in Canada, the United States, Australia, England, Scotland, Denmark, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Ireland, Belgium, Greece, Italy, Norway, Sweden, Africa, Russia, New Zealand, Brazil, Venezuela, Israel, Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. On late 2005, the Canadians Ball League is founded, bringing XBALL-style paintball to Canada. Now here's the history of equestrian. Horses were wild animals. In 10,000 BC, horses were hunted for meat, and especially for their hide, skin, which was used to make clothes, tools, and tents. It was not until around 3000 BC that people began to tame horses. Although horses were still captured for meat, they were also tamed and domesticated so they could carry and pull things along. Around this time, the horses were too small to actually carry people. Eventually, they were bred to larger sizes and people were able to ride horses. It is unsure who tamed the first horses. It could possibly have been the Indo-Europeans, as horses were certainly evident when the Indo-Europeans arrived in Greece around 2100 BC. However, one of the first horse images became apparent in the city of Troy around 1900 BC with the famous Trojan horse. Even earlier than this, around 1200 BC, in both China and Egypt, horses were being used to pull chariots. One particular ancient grave discovered in China revealed two horses and a chariot rider buried together during the Shang dynasty period. The Shang dynasty was a period of time when a large part of China was ruled under one king which lasted several hundred years, not with the same king of course. The taming of horses began to make life a little easier for people, particularly military men who rode into war on horseback, or by having the horses pull war chariots, although this didn't happen until the medieval times. Before this era men would ride their horses to war, but dismount to fight. This changed in the Middle Ages when mounted knights were introduced. With tamed horses, messengers could be sent quicker, and you could carry food in tents on their backs, making it easier to travel from village to village. People could carry goods for trading from city to city and farmers could have the horses pull carts of fruit, wheat and grain to the marketplaces for selling. However, horses were not used to plow fields at this time. Oxen were used instead. This was because horses were expensive, and needed more quality food than oxen. By the late 14th century horses varied in quality from an old nag worth 2 shillings to a noble mount costing £50 or more. By this time an even greater range of horses were available. Horses were used for war and hunting and were a vital form of transport. From the 1560s they pulled private coaches. Agriculture, farming, and industry found horses indispensable for preparing the ground for crops, operating various pieces of machinery, and pulling carts and wagons. Horse racing began in the 17th century under royal patronage, and provided for scope for different breeds. The strength, speed, and courage of the horse reflected the owner's status in society. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the introduction of horse racing, country sports and hunting with dogs, which was leisure for the aristocrats of society. The upkeep of horses became more important than upkeep their servants for the rich people. A man would pay a horse painter £50 to paint a portrait of his horse, but think it too much to pay £10 for a portrait of his wife. Now here's the history of BMX. In 1964, began assembling bikes in Canada to service the Western Canadian market. In 1968, first Canadian company to capitalize on the road bike market by importing the Jet 8 road bikes. In 1969, introduced a complete Norco packaged accessory program, making it easy for dealers to display and sell cycling accessories. In 1970, opened a distribution center in Toronto to better service Eastern Canada. In 1973, developed and brought the first full suspension BMX bikes to Canada. In 1975, designed and developed a complete line of panniers and bicycle bags. Today our Axiom panniers are proven, well respected and sought after throughout the world. In 1977, launched Bike Guard bicycle locks to meet consumers' demands for theft protection. In 1980, developed Norco Factory BMX team to promote and support our BMX line of bicycles. In 1984, one of the first Canadian bike companies to design and manufacture mountain bikes for the Canadian market. In 1988, launched Axiom Performance Gear, a premium line of bicycle parts and accessories. In 1989, developed Activa performance wear cycling clothing, the first Canadian company to design a waterproof jacket specifically for cycling. In 1991, first bike company to modify production frame geometry to accommodate front suspension forks. In 1994, developed and released first interrupted seat tube, fully active, full suspension bike for the Canadian market. In 1995, to meet the needs of a growing company, we moved our head office and Western Distribution Center into a 92,000 square feet state-of-the-art facility in Port Coquitlam, BC. In 1996, first Canadian company to sponsor a full trials team and develop a trial-specific production frame. In 1997, acquired Adams Trail A-Bike, which pioneered the trail A-Bike category and is still the most trusted, well-respected, and most recognized brand worldwide. In 1999, became the title bike sponsor of the Ride Guide TV program on OLN and supplied team riders and equipment for the season. In 2001, additional distributors picked up the strong Norco bike line. In 2002, launched Mace Clothing and Gear, a breakthrough in urban and dirt-specific accessories. In 2003, the 125 Wins Mountain Biking Magazine's Bike of the Year award point Norco hosts and industry. In 2004, Norco celebrates its 40th anniversary. In 2005, Norco was recognized by BC Business Magazine as one of the 25 best companies to work for in BC. In 2006, Norco's Team DH is awarded the first ever 5-star rating from NSMB.com online magazine. In 2007, Norco was recognized by BC Business Magazine as one of the 25 best companies to work for in BC. Now here's a history of gymnastics. The first textbook about gymnastics was published in 1793. First gym was opened by Friedrich Ludwig Jahn in 1811. The Bureau of the European Gymnastics Federation was formed in 1881. The first Summer Olympics that was held in Athens had gymnastics as a part of it in 1896. Women were allowed to compete in Olympic gymnastics in 1928. The USA Gymnastics Federation was created in 1970. Nadia Comaneci scores the first ever perfect 10 in 1976. Mary Loretin became the first American woman to win the all-around gold in 1984. The Magnificent Seven won the U.S. first gold medal in the women's team competition in 1996. The age requirement for senior-level gymnasts was changed from 15 to 16 in 1997. They changed the vaulting horse to the vaulting table due to injuries in 2001. Carly Patterson became the first American woman to win the Olympic all-around title at a non-boycotted Olympics in 2004. They introduced a new scoring system for women's artistic gymnastics, making it so a 10 is not the max in 2006. The Fierce Five won the U.S.'s second gold medal in the women's team competition in 2012. The final 5 win team gold. Simone Biles is named the best gymnast of all time and Marta Coralaya retires in 2016. Now here's a history of wrestling. Wrestling is one of the oldest forms of combat, referenced in the Iliad, and depicted in 15,000-year-old cave drawings in France. Early Egyptian and Babylonian reliefs show moves still used today. Always popular in ancient Greece, wrestling held a prominent place in the Olympic Games. It was developed by ancient Greeks as a way to train soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. After defeating the Greeks, the Roman Empire borrowed from Greek wrestling, but eliminated much of the brutality. The Greeks feared the true history of the sport would be lost, and so Greco-Roman wrestling was born. During the Middle Ages, wrestling was popular, including in royal houses in France, Japan, and England. Much later, American settlers brought wrestling traditions with them from England, and discovered wrestling to be popular among the Native American tribes. During the early years of America's development, amateur wrestling was very popular, making appearances at county fairs, carnivals, holiday celebrations, and military exercises. Of the many styles practiced during that time, however, only the catch-as-catch-can survived, evolving into the style used today at the collegiate level. Professional wrestling, in the sense of traveling performers paid for mass entertainment and staged matches, began in the post-Civil War period in the late 1860s and 1870s. During this time, wrestlers were often athletes with amateur wrestling experience who competed at traveling carnivals with carnies working as their promoters and bookers. Grand circuses included wrestling exhibitions, quickly enhancing them through colorful costumes and fictional biographies for entertainment, disregarding their competitive nature. Wrestling exhibits during the late 19th century were also shown across the United States in countless athletic shows, or at shows where experienced wrestlers offered open challenges to the audience. In 1888, New York City, New York, is host to the first organized national wrestling tournament. In 1904, St. Louis, Missouri, is host to the first wrestling competition of our modern Olympic Games. In 1912, the International Federation of Associated Wrestling Styles is founded in Antwerp, Belgium, and Ames, Iowa, is host to the first NCAA Wrestling Championships. In 1983, USA Wrestling becomes the national governing body of amateur wrestling. In 1987, Lørenskog, Norway, is host to the first World Women's Wrestling Championship. In 2004, the Olympic Games now includes women's wrestling. Modern wrestling standards and regulations were developed by FILA, an organization that recognizes 2 categories of wrestling disciplines, international and folk. And here's a history of archery. In 20,0 BC, pictures of bow and arrows are drawn on a cave wall in Valldorta Gorge in Spain. In 9000 BC, arrow shafts are found. In 7500 BC, a rock fresco of an Egyptian archer is discovered. In 3500 BC, Egyptians established the longbow as the primary weapon of war. In 3300 BC, the preserved body of a man who carried a quiver of 14 arrows is found on the Similon Glacier in the Alps. In 1800 BC, the Assyrians introduced the recurve-shaped bow, a short composite bow of leather, bone, and wood. In 1200 BC, the Hittites used the short recurved bow in mobile warfare, by shooting from their light and fast chariots. In 1066, the Normans defeat the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings mainly due to their archery and tactical skills. In the 13th and 14th centuries, longbowmen become the core of the English army. In 1363, English kings require Englishmen to practice archery on Sunday and holidays, a discipline which was given priority over any other sport. In the 15th century, the tales of Robin Hood enter popular culture. In the 16th century, the value of the bow as a war weapon declines after the invention of firearms. In 1537, under King Henry VIII of England's directions, Sir Christopher Morris establishes the Guild of St. George, the first archery society. In 1545, Toxophilus, a book about longbow archery by Roger Ascham is published. In the 1600s, several archery societies are formed, and tournaments establish archery as a competitive sport. In the 1620s, European settlers bring their knowledge of bowmaking to the North American continent. In 1673, the first ancient squirt and silver arrow contest is first held in Yorkshire in England, and continues to be held today. In 1787, women are first admitted into an archery society, and are allowed to compete in the ancient squirt and silver arrow contest. In 1828, the first archery club on the North American continent is the United Bowmen of Philadelphia. In 1878, Will and Morris Thompson learn archery from the Florida Indians. Morris authors The Witchery of Archery. In 1879, the National Archery Association is founded and begun holding national tournaments. In 1900, archery becomes an official Olympic event at the Paris Olympic Games. In 1920, the second time, when archery is an event in the Olympics, held in Belgium. In 1931, Fédération Internationale de l'Arc is founded in Poland. In 1937, bow sights are first used at an AA tournament. In 1938, Ben Pearson sets up a company to mass-produce archery equipment. In 1939, the National Field Archery Association is established. In 1946, Doug Easton develops a process for manufacturing aluminum arrow shafts which greatly increase the accuracy of the arrow. In 1951, plastic vanes are first used to replace feathers on arrows. In the 1960s, H.W. Allen from Missouri, USA, invents the compound bow. In 1961, Hoyt Archery Company makes bows with attached stabilizers. In 1970, release aids for compound bows start being used in NAA competitions. In 1972, archery becomes once again a permanent event at the Olympic Games in Munich. In 2011, FIDE changes its name to World Archery Federation. And as a bonus, here's a history of javelin throw. The pentathlon was a 5-event game played for the first time in the Olympics of 708 BC. The Isthmian, Pythian and Nemean games in ancient Greece also feature javelin throwing events. Javelin throwing and other pentathlon games were practiced throughout Europe as well, typically at local festivals. The ancient Olympics had two forms of the javelin event, one measuring distance thrown, and another to hit a specific target. In 1840, the first recorded meet date for a pentathlon-type event occurred in Shropshire, England, according to Olympic.org. During the 1880s, events that included javelin throwing, running, jumping, and walking were held throughout Europe, the US and other Western countries. The pentathlon events, including javelin throwing, were featured in the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. Throughout history, javelin throwing competitions have typically been held as part of several track and field events. Today, the javelin throw is still an essential component to track and field events in many different local, regional, national and international sports competitions, including the Summer Olympic Games. The modern-day javelin is made from metal or wood, ending in a metal spear-like point, but it no longer has the leather thong, like it did in ancient Greece. Various track and field or javelin throwing associations and clubs exist on the local to international level as well, in which men and women alike compete.
That's the history of sports. Football is still the most popular sport in the world, and it will keep going popular in the future. Now, guys, here's a question for you. What's your favorite sport? To me, my favorite sport is basketball. Why? Because basketball is one of the popular sports since December 1891. How about you? What's your favorite sport? Leave it in the comments below. And sorry for the shaking. Why? Because I am one of the heaviest Koopalings along with Roy and Morton. This is Kevin G Koopa, signing off.